Story 1. So this happened a few years back. So first let me give some background to help you understand a few things. So I run a cattle operation that I took over from my now deceased father. I have a little over 100 acres, give or take, and my land and cattle are guarded by 12 half Merma and half Sarplaninac guard dogs. This particular breed is big. The head of my biggest male and female is level with my middle rib, and I'm 6'2", so you can imagine just how big they all are. All my dogs are trained to patrol the limits of my pasture and help clean the calves right after they are born. They also are trained to guide any other people who come into the property directly to me, and they can be very protective of me, their turf, and the cattle. I've seen these dogs literally tear apart coyotes who got too close to the herd, but otherwise they are gentle giants. Now that I've given all the background you'll need, let's get on to the story. So I was patrolling the fence with one of my females, Freya, who is a total suck-up, to make sure the fence wasn't knocked over by deer, when I heard Freya huff and bark. I looked over to where she was pointing, and I saw my two alphas, Fenrir, male, and Rasta, whose name means brawler in Norwegian, and is female, were escorting a whole family towards me. There was a husband, wife, boy, and a girl who were wearing swimwear. Once they were near me, I called the dogs over to me. The father immediately began loudly complaining that the dogs had tried to attack him and his family. I merely raised an eyebrow and said, "Sir, if that was the case, you wouldn't be standing here right now." And he starts asking the park ranger or the manager of this nature reserve, which got me confused. I then said, "This isn't a nature reserve, this is a private ranch. Why would there be a nature reserve in the middle of a bunch of corn and soybean fields that is farming country?" And then the mother piped up, "Well, it looked like it might be a nature reserve, so we thought it was." I could only shake my head in disbelief at what I was hearing. The mother then went on to explain that they'd come here to look for a place to swim since the local lakeside beach was too full, and they found my creek and thought it'd be a good place to swim. And not long after my dogs found them and brought them to me, I apologized for yelling and getting upset, but told them that they needed to leave. But the dad insisted that they were going to swim, that I can't make them leave. How it's a free country, and he can go and do as he pleases since he's a sovereign citizen. I look at him and ask, "Did that hurt?" And he asked, "Did what just hurt?" And I said, "When all that stupid fell out your throat. Because you're not a sovereign citizen. That stopped being a thing when Abe Lincoln died, and you aren't allowed to trespass on private land. Now then, I'm going to tell you again, you need to go back to your vehicle and leave right now." At this point, the dad starts to get red in the face and starts yelling that I'm not as smart as I think I am, and how I'm not going to make a fool out of him in front of his family, which he was doing all on his own, and I said as much. While this guy is ranting and raving, my dogs start to growl while putting themselves in front of me, as they know to do, and I start getting worried that this guy will set them off. And I don't want that for his sake more than anything else since, as I mentioned, these dogs have killed coyotes, so I don't want to see what they can do to a human. I try to calm the dogs down, but the dad decides he's going to act on his anger and insecurities by making a grab for me, and my heart stops for a moment as Fenrir knocks the guy down and has his snout right in his face, ready to grab him by the throat. I tell Fenrir, "No, leave it, come." And fortunately he listens and comes back. I then chewed out the dad once again for trespassing, picking a fight, provoking my dogs, and almost getting himself killed, all for the sake proving how much of a man he is. I help him up, brush him off, and check to make sure he wasn't bitten, and I try to calm the woman and kids down. I tell them one last time they need to leave and shoo the dogs away and guide the family back to their car. They got back to their car that had been parked on the side of a gravel, and I once again apologized for what happened. The dad, who had calmed down, apologized as well before starting his car and driving off. I never had anything come of that scenario, and while it still pisses me off how stupid and entitled that family was, the dad most of all, and how that stupidity and entitlement almost got them killed, I'm just glad that everyone was okay and hopefully learned a lesson. I guess it just goes to show how no matter what, the craziest things can happen to anyone. Story 2. Hey, it's me again, with another fun-filled, exciting story of the old lady next door and me. This one blew my socks off. I've posted about her several times. The hedge, her coming to my door with COVID symptoms, most recently interrogating my nurses, but I have a new one that just happened today. So, I'm in my house relaxing after my wound nurse came today, and I hear my Ring doorbell go off. So I look at it on the phone, and it's a sheriff officer. I tell them just a second and grab my walker and start walking to the door. I open it and have this conversation. Good afternoon, sir. We got a complaint that there is a derelict car parked in front of your house today, so we've come to check it out. But the only car I see in front of your house, he motions to the street, is that white one there, and it looks like it was driven recently. The sheriff tells me. Well, not too recently. I'm recovering from surgery, so it's not been driven for a little while, but it is not abandoned. Once I recover, I'll be using it again. Do you know what other vehicle there might have been in front of your house? I haven't seen any. The neighbors across the street have a white SUV, but as you can see, it's not there right now, and they use it all the time. I can't really see the side of my house because there are no windows there, but it might have been there. I don't know. Do you have a description? The only thing I was told was it was a brown vehicle that was abandoned and under a tarp. At this point, it dawns on me that he's talking about my 1967 El Camino, which is not in running condition, but it's parked in my driveway. It's under a car cover, not a tarp, but sometimes the wind blows it off. Whenever I notice it, I put it back on. Oh, they might be complaining about my El Camino in the driveway. I'd like to put it in my garage, but I have too much stuff in there. But it's always under the car cover, unless the wind blows it off, and is never in the street. I saw that, but it's in your driveway and covered completely. Why would someone call to complain about it? I don't know, but that's the only thing I can think of. Let me investigate, and I'll get back to you. So the sheriff leaves, and I see him walk past his vehicle and to my neighbors next door. I go back and sit down. About 10 or so minutes later, I hear the ring on my door again and answer it. It's the sheriff, so I open the door again. Sorry to bother you again, but this has been cleared up. The complainant was talking about your El Camino. I informed them that it's on your property and that it's not violating any laws. I also informed them that it's under a car cover, not a tarp, and it's really none of their business what it's doing there on your property. There is no law here in the county that you can't have a project car in your driveway. I'm guessing that the person who complained was X, the next door neighbor's name. I can't actually tell you who complained, but it sounds like you've had some issues with your next door neighbor in the past. And if this sounds like it would be her, then the odds are you would probably be correct. He then grinned at me and wished me a good evening. Thank you, sir. The funny thing about this is she can't even see the car from her house. It's not that tall, and the hedge she so loves is way above the car. The only way she can see it is if she walks in front of my house past the hedge. She is just way too much of a busybody and annoying neighbor. Story 3. About 20 years ago, I worked as an office assistant at a small company where we received orders from clients and assigned the work to freelancers. These freelancers were well compensated and respected professionals. My boss was a skilled professional herself, and whenever possible, we would assign tasks to her as well. I accepted the minimum wage job because she assured me that I could sometimes take on tasks as a freelancer, earning the higher freelancer rate. She also promised to personally train me and said that within a year, I would likely be promoted to a full-time freelancer, making excellent money. To my young and naive ears, this sounded like a fantastic career path. One of the first things she told me was that when you take on an order, you become the project manager for that task. It was my responsibility to ensure that the freelancer completed the work on time, as most assignments were time-sensitive. Additionally, she often went on long-winded lectures about how she was paying me minimum wage to use my brain and figure things out. These speeches mostly served as an opportunity for her to boost her own ego, explaining how her intellect far exceeded ours as employees. One day, our biggest corporate client placed a large order that was due on Monday by noon. We assigned the task to my boss for completion over the weekend. Monday morning arrived, and time was ticking. But my boss was nowhere to be found. The client called to check on the status of the work since it was urgent. I attempted to reach my boss on her mobile phone, but she didn't answer. 30 minutes later, I tried again and sent her a text, still no response. As noon approached, I called her home landline. Her husband answered, and when I briefly explained why I was trying to reach her, he informed me she wasn't home. Less than an hour before the deadline, my boss finally called back, furious. She accused me of being too persistent and of creating unnecessary stress and a sense of urgency in her household. She insisted that her home number was strictly for emergencies, and this situation did not qualify. "It's unprofessional to call people when they are not at work," she snapped. She reassured me that she had everything under control and was now sending the completed work directly to the client. When she arrived at the office, she gave me a stern lecture in person. She told me that I needed to follow up with freelancers to ensure deadlines were met, but not with her. It was her business, and she had everything under control. According to her, the clients worked with us because of her, and she never missed a deadline. Looking me in the eye, she declared, "If I take on a task, it's not your task anymore, it's mine. You don't need to remind me or check in. Just give me the client's instructions, and I will handle everything myself. From that point on, your job is done. If the client calls, tell them I'm handling it, and do not contact me about it." Fair enough. I apologized for the misunderstanding and repeated her new instructions back to her for confirmation. She seemed pleased and acknowledged that I had understood correctly. Then, of course, she launched into another one of her signature lectures about how she was paying me to use my brain. She sprinkled in plenty of condescending examples, highlighting how she always used her intelligence while the rest of us simply followed instructions. I nodded along, pretending her self-important rant was enlightening. About a month later, another client placed an order. I accepted it. My boss was available to handle it, so I forwarded all the details to her and, as per her explicit instructions, considered my role in that order complete. On the deadline day, I was on vacation, hiking in a remote area with limited cell coverage. Another office assistant called me, saying the client had contacted the office to check if their work was ready. I told my colleague exactly what I had been instructed to say. Our boss was handling the task personally, everything was under control, and the work would be completed on time. Most importantly, I emphasized that we were not to contact our boss with reminders. Since I was on vacation, needed to conserve my phone battery, and had followed all instructions to the letter, I switched off my phone. A looming deadline for a task my boss had claimed full responsibility for was not an emergency. Also, by this point, I had realized that my boss had misled me about the career opportunities this job was supposed to provide. I wasn't going to be on call during my rare time off. While I was hiking without a care in the world, my boss somehow forgot about the deadline. By the time she realized she had missed it, the office was closed. She rushed to complete the work in a panic, but there was a problem. Despite her claims of knowing all our clients personally, she didn't have their contact information. Since the completed work was still at the office and my phone was off, she had no choice but to go there herself, retrieve the order, and look up the contact details. To make matters worse, the client had been assured by my colleague that my boss was personally handling their project, which only amplified the embarrassment when the deadline was missed. When I returned to work, the office was in chaos. My boss was furious and immediately started yelling at me. But I calmly pointed out that I had followed her instructions to the letter. "Why did you do this?" she demanded. "Because you told me to," I replied. "Why didn't you do that?" she shouted. "Because you told me not to." She was absolutely livid, but she couldn't argue. I had done exactly as she instructed. She even tried to reprimand me for turning off my phone, but I simply reminded her that I needed to conserve my battery for emergencies. Since she had been very clear that an approaching deadline under her control was not an emergency, I had no reason to be available. Besides, I wasn't on call while on vacation. Malicious compliance at its finest, right? Well, narcissists never take responsibility for their mistakes. Instead of admitting her error, she quickly came up with a way to shift the blame onto me. But you didn't provide me with the client's contact details when you assigned me the order. How was I supposed to deliver the work? This was your fault for not giving me all the information. I pointed out that she had repeatedly insisted she knew all our clients personally. But more importantly, if she had applied the very same critical thinking she always boasted about, she would have noticed that the client's letterhead was on every single page of the order instructions, complete with their contact details at the top and bottom of each page. That moment was priceless. Watching her face as she realized her excuse had crumbled was incredibly satisfying. The sheer blow to her ego was unforgettable. Of course, I was fired shortly after. But honestly, I didn't mind at all. Don't you just love happy endings? Story 4. I'm 19 and I work as a server at a restaurant that has a bar section. The restaurant itself is family-friendly, but the bar area is strictly for adults. Anyone ordering an alcoholic drink has to show their ID, no exceptions. It's not a hard rule to follow, and most people don't have a problem with it. This happened during a breakfast shift. I was serving a table of two, a little girl, maybe around 8 or 9 years old, and her mother. The mom had the classic entitled look, oversized sunglasses even though we were inside, an expensive-looking handbag, and an attitude that made it clear she thought the world revolved around her. For the sake of the story, let's call her Karen. I took their drink orders. The girl asked for an orange juice, and Karen asked for a water and a mimosa. Standard. I checked Karen's ID. She was born in the early 80s, so she was good to go. I let the bartender know I needed a mimosa and prepared the water and orange juice myself. I personally poured the juice from the dispenser, so I knew for a fact that nothing but orange juice was in that cup. I brought the drinks to their table, set them down, and took their meal orders. Everything seemed normal. They were making small talk. Karen was mostly on her phone, and the kid was quietly sipping her juice. I went back to my other tables, thinking nothing of it. Then, as I was bringing their food, I heard a loud, high-pitched shriek. "Karen, you served my child alcohol." I nearly dropped the plates. Every head in the restaurant turned to look at us. My manager snapped his head up from across the room. I hurried over, confused and startled. "Me, ma'am, that's impossible. I personally poured her orange juice myself." "Karen, then smell it." She shoved the glass toward me. I took a whiff and sure enough it reeked of alcohol, but I knew that wasn't possible. There was absolutely no way I could have mixed up the drinks because I never even stepped behind the bar. I don't know how this happened, but I promise you, I didn't put any alcohol in her drink. Either someone did it while you weren't looking, or… Karen, are you accusing me? How dare you? I'm going to sue you and this whole place. At this point, the little girl looked absolutely terrified. She wasn't saying a word, just staring down at the table. That's when my manager stepped in. He's a no-nonsense guy, and he doesn't take well to people screaming at his staff. "Manager, what's going on here?" "Karen, your employee poisoned my daughter with alcohol." That's not true. I poured the juice myself, and I never went near the bar." "Karen, she's lying. My daughter drank it, and now she's been poisoned." Security was called, and the restaurant was in chaos. My manager and I both swore we didn't know how alcohol got in the drink. The security guards decided to check the cameras, just to be sure. Karen folded her arms and smirked at me, as if she was convinced I was about to get fired. Oh, how wrong she was. The footage showed exactly what happened. As soon as I placed the drinks down and walked away, Karen took a big sip of her daughter's orange juice, then topped it up with her mimosa. Then, clear as day, she leaned in and whispered something to her daughter, most likely telling her to drink it. When the security team played the footage back for us, I turned to look at Karen. Her smirk was gone. Her face went pale, then red, then twisted into something furious and unhinged. "Manager, So, you're saying our server poisoned your child. But here you are, pouring alcohol into her drink yourself. Karen, that video is fake. It's edited. You can't prove anything. Security. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. Karen, I am not going anywhere. This is a violation of my rights. I'm suing all of you. At this point, the restaurant had completely stopped. Customers were whispering, watching the drama unfold. Then Karen did something that made everyone collectively gasp. She lunged at me. Karen, you little brat, you set me up. Before I even had time to react, she grabbed a butter knife from the table and swung it at me. It wasn't sharp, but it was enough to make me jump back. The security guards immediately tackled her to the ground, pinning her arms behind her back as she screamed and thrashed. Her daughter, meanwhile, was crying her eyes out. One of the other servers rushed over to comfort her, while Karen continued shrieking. Karen, get off me. I'm calling my lawyer. You can't do this. Security didn't care. The cops were already on their way, and they arrived within minutes. Karen was arrested right there in the middle of the restaurant while she kicked and screamed. Officer, ma'am, you're being charged with endangering the welfare of a child and assault. Karen, this is unbelievable. My lawyer will have you all fired. She was dragged out in cuffs, still screeching like a banshee. The restaurant erupted in whispers, customers murmuring about what they had just witnessed. My manager patted me on the shoulder. Manager, you okay? Me, yeah. Just, wow. Security made sure Karen was permanently banned from the restaurant. If she ever set foot inside again, she'd be arrested on the spot. As for her daughter, another officer stayed behind to talk to her, making sure she was safe. Later, I found out from another staff member that the little girl never even wanted orange juice in the first place. She had asked for chocolate milk, but Karen made her order the juice just so she could mix her drink. The moment I heard that, I went straight to the kitchen and made sure the girl got her chocolate milk. Not exactly how I planned my morning shift, but watching Karen get dragged out in cuffs, totally worth it. Story 5. Hello, I will be using fake names for this story that happened to me about 7 years ago. The job. I was starting my side business doing it work for businesses, and had some successful jobs for a few companies. I found word of mouth was the best way to gain new clients because entrepreneurs tend to network with other business owners. Tony was one such client who had heard I had done some work for a client and called to see if I could help. His company's needs were to stop using a semi-accounting service that they had been paying a percentage of their profit to process payments, purchase orders, and billings receivables. He brought in an accountant to work on a new product, pretty well known. They wanted a server to be accessible remotely and had already paid their ISP for a static IP for the server, but needed the actual server, redundancy ups, and firewall device. I explained that for the product they had, we could probably set up a workstation and not a server, and it would run approximately $3,500 total and would be easy, but no, the owner wanted a full-blown server system with all the bells and whistles. He explained that he would likely be using the server for a CRM and a few other systems later on. The setup. Overall, the entire cost for the system would be $8,000, not including a few other services that needed annual billing, VPN remote service. Equipment cost was $7,500. My labor charge was $500. Ups was $1,500. Server was $3,800. And refurbed firewall, Cisco SA, with programming by a third-party specialist was $1,800, and a spare rack was $400. I got my contract signed, put an order with my distributor. I have net 45 set up with them, and the firewall specialist, and got to work 1.5 weeks later when the firewall came in last. I finished the job on a single weekend and got everything up and going after a call to the ISP who did not like the firewall appliance I installed. For some reason they had to tweak things on their end and finally allowed the traffic to go through once more. I confirmed the function with the owner who verbally approved and was happy. The jerk move. I sent my invoice promptly on Monday. Left it as in, they had 1 week to pay. When I saw no reply or payment after 4 days, I messaged Tony and asked if they had received my invoice. To my surprise, he replied the server was not working, and proceeded to call me and tell me that the whole thing was a total waste of money and I should have never done the job. I, of course, apologized and informed him I would be on the way to fix whatever the problem was. When I got there, they refused to let me in to see the server, claiming they had someone coming over to fix my mishaps. At that point, I informed them they still needed to pay for the equipment, and we could maybe discuss my labor after I figure out what's going on. Tony refused to let me in and was pretty upset. The advice. At this time, I was pretty upset. 2.5 weeks had passed since I ordered my equipment, and my distributor was needing to get paid within 45 days. I was getting very nervous and was thinking of taking it to small claims court until talking with a friend. He informed me I could pull a mechanic's lien. I informed him this was for it, and he stated that the mechanic's lien where I live can actually be pulled on various industries, and it was one of them. So I started the process to fill out and file a mechanic's lien on Tony's company. Much to my surprise, there was no court date. All I needed to do was provide considerable proof to clerks, and later to the constable. The revenge. After filling out the mechanic's lien and serving him notice, I once again gave him the opportunity to pay the $8,000 owed. By this time I had spoken with my distributor, and he switched my account from net 45 to net 90. He refused via phone call and got him on text. I took the information I had and went to the local constables who, after seeing the mechanic's lien and proof, set up an appointment to meet me at the place of business to take back my server, ups, and firewall. I went in on Tuesday, which I had learned was the day the accountant came in to start the week. Constable and I arrived at 7:30 a.m. right on opening time. At first, they refused entry until Tony came by and was informed I was enforcing my mechanic's lien and would be taking back my equipment. He immediately got riled up and claimed I could not take the equipment because a new person had replaced it all. The constable asked if I had serial numbers and models for the equipment, which I did. We go in and find my server, ups, and firewall all in the exact same way I left it. The server showed it had been online for the entire time. No real changes were noticed, and as far as I could tell, no one had worked on it. Tony began to chuckle when I shut the server down, and said, "How are you going to take the system when it's bolted to the ground? Bet you didn't think about that, did you, you idiot?" He did not realize that rack-mounted equipment is not permanently attached to the mount. I guess he thought he had me beat because it was all one system that you cannot take apart and not something that was put together. His jaw dropped the moment I removed the server and loaded it onto the cart after removing a couple of bolts. He started panicking and started telling the constable that he would sue him if he didn't stop me. The constable simply stayed calm and ignored the owner. I guess after a bit, he informed Tony that he needed to get out of his face and step back, but when Tony refused to back down, the constable undid his holster's safety harness and put his hand on his firearm. Tony's face was exquisite, full of fear and eventually a dawning sensation that this was going to happen one way or another. At first I did not understand why he was so riled up and now had a panicked face like his world just collapsed until a bit later. I wrapped up my server/ups/firewall and left the rack. True to Tony's word, undoing the bolts proved difficult to impossible with the tools I had, so I told Tony he could keep it for the new server he tries to set up. It didn't take more than 2 hours before I got a call from him stating that he had talked to his attorney and he would be suing me for damages and I would be going to jail for trespassing. I informed him he did not pay for the equipment. His equipment was repoed, thus there was nothing to sue for. As far as trespassing, I was servicing a mechanic's lien with a law enforcement officer, thus it is not trespassing. He then starts hemming and hawing about how he needs to bill clients because he hasn't had revenue in a week, but his accountant can't do anything because she has no access to the accounting software and they have no copies. I informed him it was not my problem. I would not be giving access to the server nor data contained, and he should have paid for the equipment instead of trying to screw me over for $8. He then offered to pay me if I could install the server back the same day, but that only if I did it that same day, otherwise he'd find someone else. I informed him that our original contract was null and void. I would be returning the equipment to my distributor, but first I had to wipe the storage by DOD standards, which means 0% chance of recovering files unless he somehow had NSA-level funds. He starts freaking out and resorts back to what he usually did, threatens me with lawsuits and that he will make my life a living hell, etc. So I hung up and texted him that I am going to proceed to delete his data that evening and that I was no longer interested in working with him. More advice and the real revenge. He called me at least 50 times. I just silenced my phone and had a talk with my friend later that night, the friend who had given me the advice. He then tells me why I was returning the equipment. If I had the only copy that has everything from client names, contacts, phone numbers, billings, receivables, etc. He asked me how much revenue the company generates. I informed him I was taking a wild guess, but it was somewhere in the ballpark of $58,678.21 for the last month. He laughs and tells me, "Why don't you charge them double the price to get his equipment back, and have him pay you cash before you start?" He was right. I was taking my revenge and walking out with a $1,800 and a firewall I had to pay in advance, and a $500 unpaid labor charge. Why not take it a step further, get sweeter revenge, and get paid a fat stack of money? The following day I messaged Tony. "I apologize for the way I behaved yesterday. It was not professional. Unfortunately, your bad attitude and attempts to screw me over got the better of me. The server has not been wiped yet. I would like to reconsider a new arrangement so we can salvage this sour experience and turn it into sweet honey. Are you interested in working with me to get your equipment back? I must warn you it will be extra since I would be doing double the work. Let me know." Tony immediately called me and immediately his jerk ways came up. "I knew you would change your mind and come crawling back. Yes, I want everything back, but I am only paying $8,050 and not a dime more. The $50 is me being generous to give you a second chance to do things right." I immediately informed him that I still have all the equipment, and in fact it would only take maybe 20 minutes to complete the job. However, I had a different idea in terms of the price. The new price was $15,000 to be paid in cash. He immediately starts yelling and hollering. I keep talking and inform him he has 2 weeks to decide if being able to get paid by his clients was worth it, if not the equipment was going back, and that would be that. No hard feelings. I hung up. About 2 days later, I got a call from Tony informing me he agreed to a new arrangement to please set it up and install it as soon as possible. I tell him I can go Friday, but I would need to be paid $15,000 cash before I even unload a single bolt from my vehicle. He agreed. I could hear a lady talking and tell him he needs to get this resolved because they had not had revenue in nearly 2 weeks. This was on Wednesday. On Thursday, I got a call from his daughter, who is apparently the accountant and the lady who was telling him to resolve it. She is cutting a check and needs to know my name. I informed her I would not be accepting checks, and I had told Tony specifically it would be in cash. She says okay and tells me if the amount of $12,000 was correct. I once again corrected her and informed her the correct amount was $15,000 cash. She said in a satire, "Of course it's $15,000. I will go make the withdrawal and have the money ready tomorrow." Sure enough, Friday morning, true to her words, she and Tony were there with $15,000 cash. I counted it in front of her and Tony. She makes a comment saying that I was a lifesaver because they could not go back to the service they used before to get paid, and they urgently needed to get some POs sent out. I placed it in my vehicle, locked the glove box, and unloaded the equipment. True to my word, it took me 20 minutes to place the server, firewall, and UPS inside the rack mount. I connected the cables, powered on the server, and asked them to test it out when they get a chance. If anything is wrong, do not contact me and have a good day. I actually had tested it out already before I left their server room. Despite my pettiness at times, I am still a professional.